Hello and welcome to yet another build guide video. This time for you I have a Burning Arrow Elementalist, a build that I wanted to make for a long time, and I'm sorry if you waited long. I wanted to have like a week break from making content for PoE, as you could have seen on my streams, but now we've picked up the pace and we are back on track. When it comes to this build is an AoE monster, and then when it comes to single target, I have done feared with this build, no problemo. I did die, I think, twice, if I'm not mistaken. But when it comes to everything, it can clear feared, and it was rolled feared as well, so I alked it and such, so it can clear all the endgame content. I haven't tested tier 17s, but I do firmly believe it can clear tier 17s. And it's on a decent budget. It's up to around 30-ish or so divines, probably a little bit cheaper now that the league has gone on. The build has a lot of strengths and some weaknesses. One weakness being it's an evasion build, and if we get hit, it might be a little bit rough. And also, when building this build, you have to sacrifice a little bit of evasion. So we enter the cosmetic, not evasion, pardon, spell suppression. So we enter the cosmetic spell suppression area before we can actually get the gear that has spell suppression. Now, if you have a little bit of currency, that's easily solvable. Or if you are doing early league, you can just redo Atlas points. I haven't redone Atlas points in that kind of scenario because by the time we will need the spell suppression, you will have enough currency to make the gear swaps and changes. Now, one of the big problems of the build is early leveling. Now, what you need to do on this build, which does not have access to Burning Arrow. So what does Burning Arrow do? Well, Burning Arrow, if I can actually find it in my build, is an arrow that has 100% of physical damage converted to fire damage, chance to ignite enemies, and more damage with ignite. It has a Vaal version, which basically just does a lot more damage when it comes to that. But all in all, you basically fire a basic arrow and it ignites enemies. That's all there is to it. Now, I will start with Ascendancy first, and then we will go on through the leveling process, and then we'll carry on. Now, when it comes to Ascendancy, we are using 5 Ascendancy points. I will get to the 5th one, no problemo, but the first and the most important one is Shaper of Flames, which allows our hits to always ignite regardless of what element we do. That's why we can do multi-element on the bow. All damage can ignite, and 25% more damage with ignites you inflict with hits for which the highest damage type is fire, so the more fire damage, the better. Now, when it comes to another Ascendancy, we have Mastermind of Discord. Exposure you inflict applies an extra 25% to the affected resistance and regenerate mana. So basically, if we apply any exposure, exposure is reducing the resistances by the means of exposure, not the penetration, not to be confused. And then this applies an additional 25%. Now, when it comes to Heart of Destruction, that's gain convergence when you hit a unique enemy, no more than once every 8 seconds, 60% increase the air effect while you don't have convergence. Convergence is 30% more elemental damage and lasts for 4 seconds. So we get free 30% more ele damage whenever we hit for 4 seconds whenever we hit a unique enemy. Very good even for clearing maps, because if you do Breach as an example, everything just melts, as you've seen. Now, when it comes to the last one, Bastion of Elements, triggers level 20 Primal Aegis when allocated. Primal Aegis can take 75 elemental damage per allocated notable passive skill, and other Aegis skills are disabled, cannot take reflected ele damage. Aegis is basically elemental shield that has 75 elemental damage absorption per any notable. Notables are these ones with like notches on them. It also says Primal Aegis calls forth a protective Aegis, which takes elemental damage from hits for you until depleted, and it will be restored after a short delay if you stop taking elemental damage from hits, or if depleted, it's between 2 and 4 seconds. Currently, I'm at 2550. At the end, it should be 2625 once you allocate Searing Heart, but that's level 100, which is not really realistic. Now, when it comes to leveling and when it comes to pain points of the gear and of the starting off of the journey, you unfortunately need to make a ranger. I've done the write-up here, so make a ranger and get the gem at start. The first gem you get as a ranger is Burning Arrow and you momentum support. So you take a ranger, you buy a bow or you buy something with 3 links, and then toss it over to your stash tab, log on your witch, get the fireball, do the thing, get the bow, and then carry on. Support gems can be also bought in town and gotten as quest reward, and for the first few links we have Burning Arrow, Combustion, and Lesser Multiple Projectiles. That's level 8. So we do not have anything until level 8 as a witch. If you want to be a little bit advanced, you can play Ranger up until like level 4, do some side areas, and then you will be rewarded with Volley, and you can use Volley for the sake of simplicity. I did not put Volley here, I put Lesser Multiple Projectiles. Even going with just Burning Arrow, you will be able to burn through enemies, no problemo. Frostblink for movement skill, Flame Dash later on after Frostblink, and then Precision for our crit and accuracy. Now the pain point is the tree. So we start the tree on the left side, later on we will respec, but the most important thing that we need from the tree in the beginning is Elemental Overload. What does this do? Skills that have dealt a critical strike in the past 8 seconds deal 40% more elemental damage with hits and ailments. Your critical strikes do not deal extra crit damage, and ailments never count as being from crit strikes. Basically, ailment as ignite, it gets damage from our general hit. If we crit, it gets more damage and such, but we are scaling the burning part. We're not scaling the hit part, we're scaling the burning part, so that's an irrelevant thing. But 40% more damage with hits and ailments whenever we crit, and we have around like 10% crit or so, and that means we are basically always critting. So currently, critical strike chance 10.75%, so that means whenever we crit, we get the Elemental Overload. And Elemental Overload lasts 8 seconds for that. How do you know you have Elemental Overload? There will be a diamond, like little diamond icon, whatever, on the icon of the skill itself, so you will know you are actually proccing it. So that's very important to know. But as you can see, the tree is very bare bones in the beginning, especially in Act 2 as well, where we start getting some fire damage and some life. In regards to skills in Act 2, we are gaining Herald of Ash, which is going to give us a little bit of overburn and a little bit of explosion damage. We're keeping Herald of Ash until the end. But then in Act 3, we are going to the right side to finally, in Act 4, we swap these points for these points. So what you want to do is you want to go left, get the right, connect here, and then unspec these 6 points to then connect to the ranger part of the tree. The tree is a little bit over the whole like top and right side, but it is going to work in the end. So Act 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and then we have white maps and such. So follow the build guide as it goes, especially when it comes to skills, as there are some things that are very important to be done. As an example, here you can choose between grace or purity of elements. That's very important. And then later on we can do both and such once we get more mana reservation efficiency. Now, when it comes to the gear itself, I will just go through the endgame gear to make this a little bit of a shorter guide, but there is something very important, as always, that I've added. Now we've got crafting. Crafting is one thing that I'm still adding to my POBs, especially for new players, just to explain how easy it is and how welcoming it could be if you just know a little bit of detail. However, I'm preparing on my website, as you can see up here and down here, I'm preparing on my website a part that's going to be done for crafting. So when you go to my website, there will be a button for crafting. There's some things for crafting here, which are videos. There will be written guides with images and such that you could use from my website. So that would be like a universal thing, whether you keep a prefix or a suffix. Generally, that's going to be, and those are all the beginner crafts. You do not need to spend a lot of currency on them, but you can do those yourself pretty easily. Now, when it comes to items, let's cover the basics. You need a bow with as much elemental damage as possible. Any elemental damage, skip physical damage, even though it has 100% fizz to fire, skip physical damage. It's useless in regards to the scaling and how much damage we need. Just do full elemental damage, all 3 elements, as much as you possibly can. And we need damage over time multiplier and fire damage over time multiplier. What does that mean? Multiplier is basically more damage. If it's increased, it's less than more, so it's plus versus X, but that's how it works. Then when it comes to the items, you need to read what I've done here. So bow, the best one would be with multiple projectiles and such, but rune crafting is one important thing that's been added in 3.25, which adds this enchant that says burning enemies you kill have 10% chance to explode, dealing a 10th of their max life as fire damage. Hugely helpful to clear the content. Hugely helpful. If it is not going to be in 3.26 and onwards, then you can change this one to elemental damage or attack speed. Both are fine. When it comes to Quiver, base Quiver, you want to have elemental damage on, you want to have damage over time and multiplier and life. When it comes to everything else, this one would be the Hunter Quiver with damage over time multi, fire damage over time multi, and life. And then whatever else you find, but those could be expensive. This one was pretty cheap. I think it was like 50-60 chaos or something. You can find these pretty regularly on the market, and if it needs another prefix or a suffix, you can always craft those. Nothing to worry about. When it comes to the helmet is both Searing and Eater. This has been covered in the crafting section. The crafted helmet here, you can just follow the notes. I've explained how to craft it. You take 1 elemental resistance as a fracture. You then smack it with chaos resistance Essence of Envy. You get the spell suppress tier 1. You get some evasion rating, some life. GG, smack, Searing and Eater. Everything is explained here. I know people don't watch videos fully and everything. That's why I have it written. So please, for the love of God, read, because I know nobody is watching this fully. In regards to body, same thing, we start with dexterity. In regards to gloves, we start with lightning resistance. Boots, we start with maximum life. Now I will talk about gloves a little bit more. On gloves, we on implicit add fire exposure and hit applying to minus to fire resistance. This is when we actually get the fire exposure. The first time you will encounter Searing and Eater is from tier 6 and onwards maps, where you will get the influence. You sometimes, occasionally, will drop these fragments. This build is beginner friendly, but there are pain points, especially in regards to exposure. And you can get the exposure on your gloves, and when you get the exposure on your gloves, the rest of your Ascendancy works. Now, when it comes to the second one, ignites you inflict spread to other enemies within 1.2 meters. We just want to not use ignite proliferation or elemental proliferation. We want it to come from the gloves, so we save a slot for our gems in regards to our 6 link, so that we can get it here, and it spreads the ignites beautifully. There's also one more way how you can do that, but in a little bit. Boots are ailment immunity boots. They follow my guides perfectly well, so you can read and watch that as well. Amulet is a new thing that we start with life, and we hit it with dexterity until you hit either damage over time multi or fire damage, and we add burning brutality, which adds attack speed and fire damage over time multi with attack skills. That's very important to have. Now, when it comes to unique items, this build does not have many, but they're very important. The first one is Dyadian Dawn. I'll start with the belt. This belt gives us life resistances, attack damage leached as life against chilled enemies. We will always chill as we have cold damage, and also ignites you inflict with attack steal damage faster. It's 35% for base, and then when you add catalysts, it becomes 42%. So these ignites that we inflict, we want them to be faster. There is a point why, and deal no physical damage. This is a very useful belt. It's basically BIS that we need so that we could actually get under the threshold for Polaric Devastation Ring. This ring drops from the Black Star from Polaric Invitation. Sometimes this ring is very cheap, sometimes this ring is a few divines, depending on the league. But what does this ring give us? Elemental damage implicit. Global crit strike chance, useful. 2 resistances, very useful. Increased duration of ailments on enemies. You want this to be a little bit lower, or like on the low side, but it's fine. And it gives us this. When put in the left ring slot, cover enemies in ash for 5 seconds when you ignite them. And on right ring slot, cover enemies in frost. What does this mean? What is this cover thing? When we cover enemies in ash, they take 20% more fire damage. So we deal 20% more damage, and they have less movement speed. If we cover with frost, that's same for cold damage, and they have like less critical strike chance. But when it comes to fire, that's what we use. Increased fire damage taken. Very, very important. Now, it's for 5 seconds. We want our ignites to be less than 5 seconds, so that every ignite that we apply on enemy will cover them in ash throughout the duration. That's where we get the extra oomph of damage. So pay close attention to it. Have your ignites under 5 seconds. If your ignites are longer than 5 seconds, the other ignite won't apply. So you have to be very careful with that one. Now, you can only apply 1 ignite, basically, but there is an override that you can do with a lovely item called Barracks Respite. Barracks Respite is a ring that can occasionally be cheap and expensive, depending when the league is and what builds players are playing. Gives us fire and lightning resistance, adds fire damage to spells and attacks. We use attacks. Increase lightning damage. This also increases the damage of the bow, gives us a bit of maximum mana, but when you kill a shocked enemy, inflict an equivalent shock on each nearby enemy, and we tend to shock enemies all the time. And when you kill an ignited enemy, inflict an equivalent ignite on each nearby enemy. This will make the maps That's what it does. And that overrides the ignite. So when we have an ignite on an enemy, this applies an additional ignite, and then everything starts burning even more. It's lovely for Breach, for Harvest, for Legion, for Delirium. Anything that has a lot of monsters close to each other, this is going to make it phenomenal. So we have gloves that spread ignites, Barracks Respite that spread ignites when you kill an ignited enemy. It's lovely. So that's what we want to use. Those are the 2 BIS items. Well, technically 3 BIS uniques that we want to do. Now, when it comes to our 5th Ascendancy, this is where Forbidden Flesh and Forbidden Flame come in. And our 5th Ascendancy is called Shaper of Storms. What does this do? Hits always shock. Pretty simple. Shocks from your hits always increase damage taken by at least 15%, so it doesn't matter how much we shock, it's always damage taken increased by 15%, which basically means when we go into configuration, effect of shock, I should have put 50 in here, because that's the actual minimum that it applies. All damage can shock, and more effect of lightning ailments you inflict with hits. If the highest damage type is lightning, this is not going to apply all the time. As you can see here, we are doing varying degrees of damage. It's not always going to apply, so this is not going to always be correct. So keep that in mind. But the 15% here is always going to apply, so I'm keeping it there. Now, this is a cheaper variant of Forbidden Flame and Flesh versus doing Bastion of Elements, and I've chosen this one just because it's cheaper, right? So there's that for 5th Ascendancy. Very, very useful thing. Clusters. Clusters are another thing that I've added that are really, really helpful. There's a large cluster jewel with increased elemental damage. One is widespread destruction, area of effect increased damage, pretty straightforward. Prismatic Heart, all LRS, increased elemental damage, pretty straightforward. And another fun thing, Sadist, increased elemental damage if you've chilled, if you've ignite, and if you've shocked an enemy recently. Recently is in past 4 seconds. This gives us 60% increased elemental damage because we always chill, ignite, and shock, as our hits always do that, as we have a bow with all elements and added some cold on the quiver, but we are basically always shocking, chilling, and igniting an enemy permanently, that this will always get applied. Now, when it comes to, that's just bonus damage, right? When it comes to medium clusters, those are the same, 4-pointer, 5-pointer, large is 8. Those are Student of Decay and Wasting Affliction on 10% increased damage over time. Those give us simple things. Student of Decay, damage over time and chaos resistance, and Wasting Affliction, damage with ailments, damaging ailments, deal damage 5% faster. That's absolutely understandable. We want to keep it under the 5-second mark. Now, another thing that's important to do is Corrupted Blood Jewel with fire damage over time multi and increased burning damage. This one should be around 1 divine. If you go with 1 fire damage, in like fire damage or burning damage and a little bit of life, it can be like 3, 4, 5 divines. So keep that in mind. You do not need that extra life, but if you have a few extra divines, you can put it there. Now, in regards to the gear itself, we have one last thing, which is Impossible Escape. Impossible Escape is a jewel that allows us to allocate passives in the radius of a keystone notable. Keystone notables are these big ones on the tree. And what we want Let Shade. It's usually very cheap. And Let Shade is the best, if you ask me, the best damage over time Impossible Escape you can get. So why? Growth and Decay, damage over time multiplier 12%, regen 1% of life per second, and Written in Blood 10% max energy shield and 10% life, max life, 10 to strength. You can also, if you have extra points, you can do life here, or you can do extra damage over time multiplier here. It's phenomenal for any damage over time build. Phenomenal. For 2 passive points, this one is You can also go with the other one, which is a little bit more expensive, which is Avatar of Fire, and you can go with Arsonist and you can go with max elemental resistance if you feel like you would need a little bit more defense. You shouldn't, but that's completely fine. Okay, now the most important part, but heavy. How do we do single target damage? Well, let me introduce you to a skill called Snipe. You change Snipe and greater multiple projectiles depending on if you're doing AoE. So if you're doing AoE encounters, you would do greater multiple projectiles. Or if you're not doing AoE encounters, you would do Snipe. Snipe gives us another ability here that whenever we hold and pull the bow up to 7 charges, up to 7 stages with quality, our damage increases. So we fire a shot that has up to 7 stages. Now what do stages do? Every stage of Snipe, this skill's arrow deal 100 arrows deal 110% more damage with hits per stage and 82% more damage with ailments per stage, as we do a crazy amount of ailments and ailment modification. This is insane for our single target potential. That's why you're able to do feared on this build. Uber bosses I haven't tested, but feared easy. Now, supplemented with Snipe, we have on our Amulet, non-channeling skills have -7 to total mana cost. However, Snipe is a channeling skill, so you would just go to crafting bench, do this, put channeling, and just swap. That's one thing that you can do. Once you get like Enlighten 4 and stuff, you can skip that. But you can see here 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, release, and that's basically it. Now, when you get more arrows in regards to the build, so 2 more arrows on the bow, you do not need another one on the quiver. 2 more arrows on the bow, you'll have 5 arrows. You can use Snipe as a permanent thing to clear maps. So maps are going to be like clearing with Snipe. So you're just going to tap it lightly for that, and you will permanently change this to channeling skills minus mana cost. Now that's very important to know, that's very important to show, as that is the basically gist of the build, how this build works. Now this build is a very, very, very high contender for next league start of mine, so keep that in mind. And as per always, everything is written. Let me cover the few last points. If you want to go to configuration to see for Snipe, you go skills, Snipe enable, disable multiple projectiles, set the burning arrow here, configuration, Snipe stages, 7 Snipe stages, enjoy DPS. That's basically it. So I'm not going to overdo that or anything. So this is going to be very, very simple. So we are doing around 3 million DPS, which is more than enough, as you've seen from the video. But please follow the guide to the T, as this is one of the more fiddly setups that you could do in a build. It is beginner friendly, don't get me wrong. However, it will require patience and learning about certain things. So how Snipe works, how Elemental Overload works, how ailments work, but that's not too difficult as I've explained it. So it's pretty simple. You hit, enemy starts burning. And then when you kill enemies start exploding because of Herald of Ash. Now, when it comes to everything else, the build is basically supplemented with one extra thing, and I want you to pay very close attention to this. Vaal Haste is not linked in chest. You can do 5-link chest. We did 6-link for stream content. 5-link chest, and you only use Vaal Haste for extra movement speed and attack speed. So you and nearby allies gain 30%, 29% cast speed and 30% increased attack speed. Cast speed is irrelevant. And you gain 90% movement speed. That's the only reason why. So only Vaal Haste, not regular haste. We do not have mana to use regular haste. As you can see, not enough mana. Okay, Vaal Grace is also a great tool that helps us with evasion, but now on top of that, Flasks. We've got Flasks and Pantheon left. Flasks. I love an instant flask. I suggest it to everyone, and I love Panicked Alarmed Flask because whenever we are at 50% or lower HP, we get instant life immediately and immunity to bleeding and corrupted blood. Enough said. When it comes to defense flasks, we've got Jade Flask, which is evasion rating flask with more evasion and increased effect. I like increased effect because I have a lot of monsters in my maps and it's basically permanently up, besides looting the map. But that is permanently up. However, in my POBs, you will never see me like use flasks active unless I have a mage blood, so keep that in mind. Next one is, not quartz, Stibnite Flask. Stibnite Flask is a more evasion rating, so we've got Jade with 1 evasion, and this one that gives us more evasion with increased effect, gives us even more, and reduced effect of curses, as those pesky curses are very annoying, so we want to reduce their effect. Next one is Quartz Flask for phasing. We do not use this one for suppression, keep that in mind. We use it for phasing, as phasing helps greatly when you are funny, like Heavy, and when you flame dash into enemies. Don't be like Heavy. Increase duration, as we want it to be as long as possible, and regenerate life per second during effect, as we want that regen to last as long as possible. I do not have the quality on it, so that could last even longer. Add quality to your flasks. I completely forgot. Then the last one is Quicksilver Flask of the Order with 13%. Never mind. This one is just for more movement speed with increased effect to get more movement speed out of it. Lasts shorter, but it doesn't matter. 5 seconds is pretty enough. And 15% of damage taken from hits is leached as life during effect. This one is whenever we do get hit, because we usually shouldn't. Whenever we do get hit, we get 15% of that damage taken from hit. We get back as life. So something needs to hit us for some good amount of damage so that we would fall over and die, especially as we have... This should be level 20 cast when damage taken and level 20 Immortal Call, which gives us a huge amount of damage absorption as well, as we have 4.3k life, and we can proc them. Cast when damage taken with quality is 3k total damage from hits. So we can proc this pretty darn well, and it is going to work phenomenally with the build. Now, when it comes to Pantheon, my choice is Solaris, as we are evasion, 20% chance to take 50% less area damage from hits. Very helpful, very helpful. Physical damage reduction, well, there is only one nearby enemy. That's very good for bossing, otherwise it's irrelevant. We use it for chance to take less area hits. 8% reduced ele damage taken if you haven't been hit recently, as we're evasion build. The point is we weren't hit recently, and that's going to help us with our elemental primal ages and such. Capture the Gorgon, which is take no extra damage from crit strikes if you have taken a crit recently. This helps with regex, but also if there are modifiers like Wildwood Blue Essence that gives enemies crit, we are basically taking no extra damage from crits if you've taken one in the past 4 seconds. And the last one, 50% chance to avoid ailments from crit strikes. Poison and bleed can crit, and that can burn us severely. It happens once in a blue moon, but that blue moon does happen. So there's that. For minor, you either go with Aberoth, that annuls the Searing Exarch modifiers, or you go with Reslata, that gives you life loss charges and reduced life regen rate. The rest are however you'd like. Until you get ailment immunity, you basically go Brine King to chance to avoid being frozen, and that's it. So that would be it in regards to this build. It's a phenomenal build for under 30 divines. It can clear content. Next upgrades are basically get a Quiver with double dot multi, get a neck with double dot multi, well, increased fire damage and dot multi, get a bow with +2 arrows and double dot multi, so that you can put in Snipe instead of GMP, and then double corrupts if you want. But one final mention that I want to do before I go is the honorable mention of finding a wonderful Lethal Pride jewel, which is insane for the price of one divine, and that is Lethal Pride of any commandeer number 16481. This takes the hat off, and gets the cake. The reason for it is this. It gives us burning damage, 2, 3, 4. So 80% increased burning damage, 0.4 of attack damage leached his life, and ignites you inflict deal damage 10% faster. This is insane for one divine. Nobody uses this. It's insane. Later on, you can remove like spell suppression here and then add like them from tattoos, but I didn't want to go into expensive stuff because that's like 3 divine for a tattoo, like wow. But this one is readily available in trade, and it is here. Lethal Pride 16481. It is, so if I go here and if I do this, no, actually delete this. If I go this, it's readily available for a divine. And if you go like any, there are way too many of these for one divine. Nobody uses them. Use it. Maybe I'll grow to be an influencer that can raise the prices on the market one day. Anyways, that's going to be it for the stream. If you want to see more stuff from me, you can see it on YouTube in the playlists in the video section as well. You can come over the streams on twitch.tv/heavyheels or on YouTube. Those streams are there as well. However, after the stream, I unlist them because it's easier for the algorithm. And you can also check my website. There will be updates and written guides with images and stuff when it comes to crafting. The website is still under very big development, but it's functional, so you can find stuff there. Everything is going to be posted, nothing to worry about. I want to thank you all so much for stopping by yet another guide. I'm sorry it has been another long one, but I love explaining things thoroughly. Please read the notes. Don't mix up things. I've taken a lot of time to craft this one, so it is very easy to follow. And that's going to be it. So thank you so much for watching. PoE content is back. I had a week-long break off of PoE content. Next ones are either PoE for Dummies, the old versions revamped, or boss guides. So thank you so much for watching and have a good one. Oh yeah, if you liked the video, give it a like. If you want to sub, please do sub. We're chasing 2K subs by the end of the year. Yeah, thank you. Bye.